The goals of Kreia in Knights of the Old Republic 2 are a mystery to some, and it really does take, I think, a variety of playthroughs to truly understand what she's trying to achieve. And while it may seem like she's just a mad woman who's cryptic and angry at the world, she does have a very clear goal within the initial stages of the game. From the very beginning, it is simple. She wants to kill the Force. Now, not literally in the sense that she wants to kill it at the source, but she wants to kill its influence from the Star Wars galaxy, and essentially deafen all living things from the Force itself. But how on earth does one learn to kill the Force? Something that resides in all living things and binds the galaxy together, because let's be honest, it's probably not something that's taught very often in the Star Wars universe. But before we delve into this, let's talk about today's video sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by FanHome. FanHome are committed to making awesome build-up models and collector's items, and right now they have an epic Millennium Falcon. Each month you'll receive an officially licensed piece of the Falcon made out of ABS metal that you can build yourself, which will ultimately become a huge one-to-one studio-scale replica of the iconic ship. And not only that, but you'll get illustrated magazines, as well as free gifts like hats and mugs. So if you want to make a fine addition to your Star Wars collections, check out the link below. It'll take you to FanHome's website where you can learn more. Now, to understand why Kreia wants to kill the Force, and to understand how Kreia learned to kill the Force, we need to understand a little bit about Kreia herself, her story, her past, her origins. I'm going to assume that most of you understand Kreia's story to even a little bit of an extent, and I'm not going to go in depth into her goals. If you want to know about those goals in depth, I recommend checking out the video in the top right. It's a 30-minute deep dive that's got you covered with everything you want to know about Kreia. But to put it simply, Kreia hated the Force. Now, in her early years, Kreia was a Jedi historian and a teacher, but she was a rather unorthodox one. She taught young students about the Force and about the Jedi and the Sith in a way that the Jedi themselves saw as heretical. She wanted to teach them about complexity, nuance, and moral ambiguity within the general ideals of what makes a Jedi. But so many of the questions that she asked her students were difficult. They provoked a level of thinking that went beyond the Jedi code. So much so that her students would call these Kreia's conundrums. And through these conundrums, she ended up creating Revan, whose fascination for all things and rebellious nature stemmed from the unorthodox teachings of Kreia. And there were of course many others that we don't even know about. So, after Revan went to war against the Mandalorians and ended up convincing many other Jedi to follow him, the Jedi, being dogmatic as they were, had assumed that Revan fell to the dark side, and it all stemmed from Kreia's teachings. Now, because Revan and the Jedi were away fighting the Mandalorians, they chose to punish Kreia. They believed that his existence was her fault, so they exiled her and expelled her from the Jedi Order. And what happens after this is a bit of a mystery. If you're a believer in the Kreia is Aaron Kai theory, then Kreia went to war against the Mandalorians. She followed Revan into battle, but that is just a theory, a Knights of the Old Republic theory. But the only thing we truly know is that Kreia as a character disappeared after she was exiled, and then reappeared sometime after the Mandalorian Wars, because Kreia was following in the footsteps of her favourite student Revan, and she was intent on continuing his legacy, so she sought to learn his truth, his goals, his ambition, and this led her to a mysterious academy on the planet Malachor 5. And within this academy were assassins, an order of warriors created by Revan, and instead of attacking Kreia, they welcomed her, and they provided her with the same scripture that Revan had learned from, and these were the teachings of the true Sith, the empire that survived in the dark regions of space that spawned from Marco Ragnos. And it was through these teachings that she, like Revan before her, embraced the dark side. But because her goal was honouring Revan's legacy, she intended to use her newfound Sith assassins as a gadfly, an almost illegitimate threat that were designed to cause problems for, but not to destroy the Republic, so that it didn't grow stale and was militarily ready at all times for the potential return of the true Sith. Through this scripture, or the Sith Hermetica as it was known, Kreia learned of terrible dark-sided secrets, and she also learned of wounds in the Force. She began to realise that Malachor 5 as a planet was one such wound, a place that was the centre of so much instantaneous suffering that it became a nexus for darkness and became a wound in the Force, where the echoes of suffering reverberated outwards and caused pain for any of those who could feel it. It was also on Malachor 5 where she discovered a man, but this man was unique, because much like the planet itself, he was a wound in the Force, a dead spot within the Force, a black hole in a sense that was consuming the Force around him. And using her newfound knowledge, she taught this man how to control it, and christened him the Sith Lord Darth Nihilus. She also discovered a warrior from Darth Revan's Sith Empire named Darth Sion, and the three of them became the leaders of a new faction known as the Sith Triumvirate. But of course, as with most Sith factions, this was a fragile alliance at best. And eventually, the other two Sith Lords became disillusioned with Kreia's goal of protecting the Republic and continuing Revan's legacy, as they instead wanted power and dominion over the Jedi. And so they came together and they betrayed her, much like the Jedi who saw her teachings as heretical, and they stripped her of the Force and exiled her from the Sith. Now, there is an entirely separate discussion to be had here about why the Sith didn't kill her. And if she was stripped from the Force, how did she regain her ability to feel it? These are really good questions for an entirely separate video. But for this video, we just know that she did regain her connection to the Force, and she also became very, very bitter. By this point, Kreia was sick of the Jedi and the Sith. And the common denominator between those two factions was the Force. And based on everything she had learned as a Jedi historian and everything she had learned within the Sith Hermetica, she concluded that it was the Force that was influencing these groups to wage endless wars, to achieve some measure of balance. And so with that conclusion, it was not a matter of defeating the Sith or the Jedi, it was defeating the Force itself. And through her time as a Sith, being around Darth Nihilus, being on Malachor 5 and the teachings of those scriptures, she sought a new experiment, and remembered there was another test subject, the Jedi exile, a blank slate which she could control, manipulate and use to destroy the Force. And she knew this because of Darth Nihilus, a person who had suffered the same fate as the exile, but unlike her, embraced the wound and became dependent on the Force, whereas the exile completely disconnected herself from it so utterly it was like the Force never existed. And Kreia knew that this all stemmed from Malachor, the place where all of these wounds were created. The wound created on this planet caused the exile so much pain that it would have killed her if she stayed connected to the Force. So she had to make a decision, to die or to let go of the Force, deafening herself from it and destroying its influence over her, giving her freedom from the wound inside. But with all of this information and all of this knowledge, Kreia knew that if she reconnected the exile to the Force and then killed her within the epicenter of that suffering, the heart of Malachor, it would create a third wound that would reverberate across the entire galaxy. And every living thing would feel the same level of suffering that the exile would, and they would have a choice, just like her, to die or unconsciously disconnect from the Force entirely, deafening the galaxy from the Force and essentially destroying it. Now the thing is, all of this was hypothetical, There had been no specific moment in the past where something like this had ever been attempted, at least not on a galactic scale. There was no guarantee that Kreia's plan would have worked, and we will never know if it would have worked. Hell, the general conclusion of Knights of the Old Republic 2 is pretty rushed, and that's because of the time restraints during development, and because the dark side ending is non-canon and rather underdeveloped, we don't really know what would have happened. But with that said, I do hope this video answered how she learned to do it, or at the very least, how she learned to come up with the hypothetical idea behind deafening the galaxy to the Force. Through her learning with the Sith manuscripts, Malachor 5 itself, and Darth Nihilus, she learned in so much depth about the intricacies of wounds and its impact on the Force itself, and essentially used the Jedi exile, another wound, as her test subject for her attempted killing of the Force. And if you want to view it this way, you could consider Revan being the one that kind of allowed her to learn about these techniques, because it was him who found the Sith Academy on Malachor 5, it was him who discovered the Sith Hermetica, and it was him who discovered how to do these things with Force wounds first. And it was only by following in his footsteps that she was able to learn these truths as well. However, Kreia's goals do change by the end of Knights of the Old Republic 2. Her intent at its conclusion is not to just kill the Force, but that is for an entirely separate video, one that I've already made. So don't forget to like this video and perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. And if you want a really in-depth video about Kreia, check this video out. It's a 30-minute deep dive into all of her goals in KOTOR 2. I'll see you there.